What's up, Bulls Nation? Welcome to another episode of Bulls on Tap, presented by On Tap Sports Network. I'm your host, Derek, and filling in for Melissa tonight is my guy, Morris, one of the Bulls on Top writers. Morris, what's going on, man?
Nothing much, man. Just glad to be here. Like I say on the tweets, Melissa's doing some famous stuff tonight, so I'm pitching in, doing my part.
And we have a special guest tonight, all the way from across the pond in the UK, one half of Sea Red UK. Neil, how's it going, man?
It's good. It's great. I was just saying to you there before we jumped on. It's the middle of the night here, but the things you do for Bulls, right?
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, last week we were talking about how the Bulls have like the best fan base ever, and this is proof that you're all the way across in the UK and you're in the middle of the night jumping on the podcast just to talk about the Bulls. Recently at the Bulls home opener, I had the pleasure of meeting you and your daughter. Like, how was the trip over, and how long does it take?
Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, I work in aviation as my real job anyway, so I'm used to flying around the place. But I suppose I live in Ireland anyway. I don't actually live in the UK. Matt, the other half of Sea Red UK, he lives in the UK, and I live in Ireland. So we do remote whenever we're doing our pod. So I'm a little bit closer than I would be if I was in the UK. So the flight over, it's what, 7-8 hours. Then we get into Chicago and jumped on the train and straight into the city. I've been there a few times, so I kind of know my way around. And it was my daughter's first time going, so she had an absolute ball. She loved it.
What was her favorite part of it?
Oh, the game. Yeah, hands down, being at the game. And she got to go to the Advocate Center the hour before the game as well to do a Kids Nation training session, which she absolutely loved as well. So I guess she kind of wraps that up as in part of the game anyway. But that whole experience for her was just mind-blowing.
I mean, that's what we like to hear, especially if you're bringing her into Bulls fandom, that she had an amazing time and experience with the Bulls.
Yeah,
one more heart to break, right?
Yeah, so tell the people, like, being from Ireland, how do you become a fan of the Chicago Bulls?
I guess it's no different than it is for a lot of people in the States as well. You know, there was this guy that used to jump around and look like he was flying back in the 90s, and he kind of reached all the way around the world, and it was no different over here in Ireland. I was actually living in the UK then, and a friend of mine was a basketball player. I was never really a basketball player. I used to play soccer. And we smashed a couple of windows in the field where I live, where we used to play soccer. So we weren't allowed to play soccer anymore. So I went up to my friend that was playing basketball and kind of said, any chance you can show me how to play? So he kind of let me have a little shoot around with him. I kind of really enjoyed it. And then he was a Lakers fan, can't have everything. And he introduced me to a few mixtapes and was trying to kind of push me towards Magic Johnson and the Lakers. And I was just seeing this bald-headed dude in a red jersey doing stuff I'd never seen any human being ever do before. And that was it. I was hooked. Bulls fan for life.
Hey, that's how it starts for most people. It's
absolutely
global reach, Michael Jordan.
Yep, that's exactly it.
So, being from Ireland and you're being a Bulls fan, how, like, I know you get league pass, but like you always got Bulls gear. How's it getting Bulls gear over in Ireland? And how did you and Matt hook up to start your podcast of Sea Red UK?
Yeah, that's an interesting enough one actually, because myself and Matt didn't know each other previous to this at all. There was a friend of mine that I used to live close to in England. We played basketball together. We were good friends, and he was a Bulls fan. He was a massive BJ Armstrong fan actually. And I kind of started texting him once League Pass came around that we could start watching the games live. So I'd be texting him about the game, and he kind of hit me up and said, "Look, Neil, I don't stay up and watch the games live. You need to find a new outlet. You're keeping me awake at night." So he was already on well, it was Chicago Bulls UK UK Fans, I think, was the original incarnation of it, and Matt ran it on Facebook. So my friend Neil put me in touch with him on Facebook, and we kind of realized quite quickly that we were the only two that didn't miss any games live. So we would constantly be texting during the game. It was as good as sitting next to each other as far as we were concerned, watching the game together. So a few other people from the group kind of picked up on this and said to myself and Matt, like, would you ever do a podcast, for the people in the UK? And that was it. Then we decided we kind of try and help a few people get involved in it, but we were going to take a backseat. We weren't going to be the face of the podcast at all. That was not the plan. And then one guy let us down kind of at the last minute, and we decided, well, the ball is rolling now. So the two of us jumped on with a third guy who doesn't do it anymore. He kind of backed away because he couldn't commit to the amount of time we were putting into it. But that was it. It was born from there. And initially audio, we were using Stump, which was Tim Sinclair's app. And that was how we first started doing the audio, and then gradually moved on to doing the video stuff on YouTube, as well as the audio stuff now through Megaphone. So, we're going, it's heading towards 3 years now, I think.
That sounds right. Yeah. Because I definitely remember when you guys had the podcast in the Stump days. Used to listen to that,
Yeah.
And I should say, like, it's cool. Like, this moment for me is awesome because in my own journey with the content stuff, C-Rate UK was like day one first adopter, where it's like you guys just started engaging in stuff that I did, and then sort of in parallel as well. Derek with the Nothing But Bull podcast. That was the first ever podcast I guested on, so it's just like it's a cool sort of like mashup of different stops in this journey. And I think it's a great testament to the strength and the caliber of community we have as Bulls fans, where it's like it really is a tight-knit group, even across like different time zones, different cities, different countries. Like this is just an amazing experience.
Yeah, it really is.
They're all just sickos that absolutely love this team. Where you're staying up in the middle of the night to watch a game, or early morning.
The West Coast games are an absolute killer. It's not too bad when it's East Coast or Central, but those West Coast tip-offs, if it's a 3 a.m. tip for us here sometimes, and that's just brutal. Especially for Matt, a lot of the time, because he's a truck driver, he's up at 4 or 5 o'clock going to work a lot of the time. So he'll literally hang on for as long as he can to watch all of the game sitting down before he actually has to catch the tail end of it while he's driving the truck and starting work. So yeah, sleep is certainly a rare commodity for us anyway.
Yeah, I seem to remember, like, I feel like Matt's posted pictures of him from the truck before watching the game.
Yeah, he actually records from his truck. All of our podcasts are done from him sitting in his truck.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that is an extreme level of dedication.
There you go. That's what it takes. That's what you do when you love a team, right? And this team gave us so much in the 90s. It's given us very little since, but it gave us so much in the 90s that we're all hanging on in there for just another little taste of that at some point, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of very little since, the Bulls put out very little against the Jazz last night, where they've allowed like the most points to the Jazz franchise in history for the Bulls.
Yeah, it was yet another tough watch. At the same time, it kind of felt that they might have gone on a bit of a run. They were kind of keeping it between 5 and 8 points for the vast majority of the game. And I kind of was hanging in, hoping they might go on another little run like they had done in a few of the other previous games, but they just couldn't seem to break the back of it at all. And I guess they just ran out of gas in the end for a finish. But I mean, it should never have become that big of an issue with a team like the Jazz. But there you go.
Yeah, so it's interesting because what I noticed from just sort of like the timeline reactions to that game, it made a lot of people think about, like, oh, is this the Bulls playing down to the competition again? Mm-hmm. Because it felt like that. I might suggest it's a is a bit different this season because I think if you say like playing down to the competition, that would imply that like there is a caliber of talent on this roster to where like they actually are stepping down beneath themselves. But it's just frankly, I mean, I just don't think like the talent's there anymore to make that excuse. It's just, there's there's noticeable holes and gaps in this roster this season, especially on the defensive side where it's not pleasant, but I think, this is something that, that Utah game is something that Bulls fans are going to unfortunately have to get used to seeing. It's just there's only so much running and gunning can get you if you can't get stops.
Well, this is exactly it. And it's not just the stops either. They seem to be running at pace, which is great to watch. It's entertaining to see them going from end to end. But you need to get a stop on the defensive side and you need to get a score on the offensive side. And there are big patches in these games where the Bulls go on droughts, where they're not getting stops defensively and they're not getting scores either. And that's how they're getting these deficits of 10, 15, 20 points. And it becomes this uphill struggle then to try and get back into the game. And I mean, we joked about it on the pod. Myself and Matt recorded tonight before this, and we joked about it on our pod tonight, kind of saying Billy Donovan needs to introduce a new philosophy because the Bulls don't seem to be getting going until they're 15, 20 points down. So he should be bringing them into the locker room before the games and saying, right, you're starting with a handicap. You're already 15 points down. Go out there and get this game and see if that makes any bit of a difference. Because at the minute, they just seem to be like so slow out of the gates.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they seem to take a while to start warming up to that fast pace that they want to play. And, half court offense really isn't their strong suit at all right now. So you got to run and gun and you got to make those threes and try to outscore the opponent because you're not playing any type of defense. Like Walker Kessler was destroying us.
Mm-hmm.
Like they got everything they want in the middle in the paint. I think we're like last in allowing points in the paint. So AC's
I believe
not
it.
there to save us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Walker Kessler. I'm just looking at his stats. He got 12 points last night. Colin Sexton hung 24 on this. Keontae George just got anything he wanted last night. It was crazy. Like the amount of like threes he just bombed on this all night.
Yeah, he played out of his skin, to be fair.
Yeah.
Shout out to Bulls for Life, who said Billy should be fired and put on the first plane to Taiwan. He can go coach Dwight Howard and Jeremy Lin.
Do you think it's fully? I know, Derek, you're really, really anti Billy Donovan, and I know that. But do you think that it is all on Billy this season now? Because I'm not so sure that it's entirely on him. He doesn't have the personnel, and he's changed the system, right? So he's playing this fast pace. We're number one in pace now in the NBA, right? So he's playing this fast paced game, and they've completely changed their shot profile now. They're shooting 3-pointers way more than they were. I mean, I can't remember exactly what last position I saw them at threes. I think they were like 5th or 7th or something like that in threes attempted. So it's completely different to what we saw last year. And I don't think that the team has caught up yet to the system. Like they were so used to playing methodical, slow basketball that ran through DeMar, came into the mid-range, and then might kick back out again, or you might just look and see what DeMar did with the ball, maybe go for a rebound if he missed. And now it's completely different, especially with the likes of Zoe and Giddey running the point now. It's fast-paced. The passes are whipping around a lot faster than they would have done before. And players aren't ready for the ball. You see a lot of ball passes being fumbled. Now, they might not necessarily lose control completely, but it's slowing down that popping of the pass. And it's breaking down the play. And you can see that they're struggling with that. And then the defense gets set and it just falls apart.
Yeah, this may be shocking to everybody, but I don't really blame Billy for this year. I do blame him for something. I'll touch on that a little bit later. But
okay,
as far as how the Bulls are playing, and there's nobody that's a really good defender. I mean, Patrick Williams is average. Io's off the bench, and I'd say he's about an average defender as well. Everybody else is kind of like a below average defender. And for you to have them where there's no defensive anchor because Caruso's gone, Vooch is not a rim protector. So, he's doing the best he can, but they're still kind of playing that drop coverage with Vooch that never really worked. They've tried to implement zone where you still see two guys are a man-to-man while they're trying to play a zone because they're not used to playing other defensive schemes. And then, as you said, this fast-paced offense, some of the guys are not used to it yet. And you see with Giddey where guys are fumbling those passes where he hits them where they need to be, or guys are making too many passes because they're trying to do this fast-paced, move the ball from side to side, swing, 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 and they're passing up some pretty good looks to try to get another one, and it just doesn't work all the time. Like, Morris, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I've had my moments, I think, over the last few seasons where I definitely have been critical of Billy Donovan, and I would have to say, well, anybody's been following me on Twitter, I think most people are starting to understand like where my head's at on this team, this roster at this point. I can't blame Billy anymore. I agree with what you said, Neil. It's like the roster that Billy is working with right now. I just think he's working miracles. That's all we can ask for him to do. And if anybody's going to be blamed, I think you have to blame Arturas Karnisovas for the offseason that gave Billy this roster. To be fair to him, I actually think he's doing some things that are like going underappreciated by Bulls fans so far, as far as like what he's trying to do in terms of putting together an offensive scheme that can like be functional for this roster that is kind of a mixed bag of offensive contributors. They want to shoot more threes at the same time. It's not like they've got like a top to bottom roster full of dead eye shooters. I wrote about something I noticed last week in the Magic game the Bulls had where, Billy's kind of, between Billy and his staff, they've pulled out a page from the Golden State Warriors offense, right? They're running this post split action, or at least they ran it in that game a bit. There was one possession I saw last night in the Utah game where Vooch had it. He was able to hit Giddey on a cut, and then it drew a foul at least. But you would hope more of those kind of things can get mixed in with this whole running gunning thing, because at some point the half court's going to have to matter, whether it be because the Bulls are matching up against an elite transition defense is going to cut off a fast break, or because, guys just are gassed and they need something a bit more methodical, a bit more like, something where it's like they can get a good shot and keep the ball in control and not turn it over. Like, so all that's to say is I think Billy's doing the best he can with the players he has. And honestly, if there's somebody to blame, I think you have to look at, this mixed bag of, you still have Zach and Vooch and Lonzo at the same time. They're trying to bring along and develop, younger guys like Phillips and Dalen Terry and Modest as well. And I'm sure we'll talk about, the whole Modest G League thing at some point too. But it's just like, even when AK is trying to set a direction, he still has not set a direction. And I think that's really what, we need to be talking more about as Bulls fans. Like Billy, like his tactical decisions, we could squabble about that, but I don't think that's going to be the thing that's holding back this roster this season.
Right. I agree with you. I mean, Billy did not put this roster together. I'm not sure that he didn't have any say with it being a whole bunch of guards, but that's another story.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does like to go small ball quite a bit. But then look, I read today that Alex Caruso has already been playing the 5 out in OKC as well. So it's not the only one that's doing it. OKC thought, Caruso thought he was going to get away from that going to OKC, and he's out there doing the same thing there too, right?
I mean, hey, Billy established the president, so
It's
yeah.
true.
I'm like, okay,
There's
I'll play all 5 positions.
There's something interesting I caught too, and I'll shout out, our guy Drew Stevens, who writes for the Bigs, and also he has his podcast on CHSN. He asked both Billy Donovan and Vucevic questions about the defense last night, either last night or today, presumably, where the question is like, are there issues going on with the Bulls defense now that there isn't a defensive anchor? And I'm paraphrasing both of their answers, but like it was both of like Billy and Vucevic talking about like, oh, well, that's on everybody. We have to do a better job of communicating. And like my response to that was like, honestly, it was a low-key rant because like when I listened to those responses from both Billy and Vooch, like they're still talking about like, oh, we haven't figured out communication. It's 7 games in the regular season. You had a whole preseason. You had training camp. You have voluntary camp like the whole summer. Like, and you guys are vets. You're starters. Like we got this mixed bag of guys who need minutes to play, but at the same time, it's supposed to be supposedly learning from you, the vet, because they have to get habits going and all this other garbage that AK says. And you guys still can't play defense. So like, what are we doing? Like why are we trying to win matchups that we still don't win and we're not developing guys? Like, where are we heading? Like that's kind of where my head's at already at this point.
Yeah, dude, like that's my nitpick with Billy. It's been the development of Modest. They sent him down to the G League to scrimmage. That's fine. Like NBA teams don't practice much, but you're giving this guy 3 minutes on the court and then you're just pulling him off, and you're playing THT almost 30 minutes last night. What are we doing here?
Yeah, it's wasted opportunities for sure for the development of players, I think. And I know there was a big panic when Mattis was sent down to the G League, but they don't start playing games till next week, so it was only ever going to be for training purposes. And I'm not angry at that. I don't have any issue with him going down and practicing and getting some more drills in and practicing and playing some more that way. But he needs NBA experience, and it's that simple. And he even does get a certain percentage of that just by sitting on the bench too, because he's sitting down next to the likes of Torrey Craig and Javon Carter, who are also bench riding, and they're going to be explaining things to him and talking him through things as he's seeing it on the court. He's not going to get that down in Windy City. He's only going to get that by sitting on an NBA bench. Now, ideal world stuff, I prefer him to be getting a bit more tick on the actual floor itself as well, because that's where he's going to get his best experience. But I think the problem is that when he has had the time so far, he's been quite underwhelming compared to what he was in preseason, and that's done him no favors. I think if he kind of had a bit more, it's one of those catch-22 situations, isn't it? Whereas if he got a bit more tick, he might prove himself more, but he's not getting the tick because he hasn't proven himself. And Billy needs to take those opportunities in certain games where he can play him and give him a decent amount of minutes so that he can really try and acclimatize to the game.
Yeah. The thing I think about when it comes to like that sort of like that train of thought, like I understand it from Billy's point of view, and at the same time, I also think about like, why does Billy have that point of view right now? And this is where I'm going to be on a soapbox probably this whole season about AK. Like AK, whether people want to believe the words or think that like AK was just saying stuff just because he's, no NBA executive can really say, oh, we're tanking for a pick. Like I feel like we do on some level have to hold AK to account for his words of saying like, oh, we're trying to win every single game. And if the mandate from Billy's boss is go out there and win my games, Billy's going to do what he has to do to win the games. Whether he actually wins them or not, obviously that's another conversation, because obviously like the Bulls aren't really doing a good job of winning, but Billy's doing what he knows in all of his infinite like coaching experience to try to do it. And part of that is like this, to me, this coaching move that, like, again, I understand it on the level of Modest is certainly raw and there's some things he has to work out. However, like pushing Modest to the back of the bench because you want to hopefully try to like squeeze out a win against the Utah Jazz and you still don't win. Like, this is where it's just like, something has to give. A real like executive decision has to be made here. Literally, an executive decision needs to be made of like, what roster do I want to live with for the next 2 or 3 seasons? Because like having this mixed bag is just, it already is going predictably where we probably most Bulls fans thought, which was right back to mediocrity. Like nothing's changing.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you. And that's the danger, isn't it? You're stuck in NBA hell right in the middle. And they'd be better off if they would just focus on development and bring the young guys through and hopefully get something decent in the off season, in the trade window, or in the draft. And the problem is that whilst you've got the likes of Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic on that roster, it's not going to happen, because they're going to keep pushing those vets to play hard and play to win. And players are going to play to win. They're not going to play to lose. And the coach is going to push you to win. So it is on AK to do something with the construction of the roster in order to put themselves in a position to not necessarily lose, because I hate trying to get a team to lose. I'm all on for trying to play your hardest, but to concentrate on the development of moving this team forward in the future and not remaining stuck in this area where you're neither up nor you're down. You're just straight slap bang in the middle, going nowhere.
Let's see. So do you guys think that, depending on what the record is nearing the trade deadline, that's going to affect, like, if AK says, okay, we need to move Zach and Vooch, or, oh, we can make the play-in?
That's the dangerous thing with this particular executive, because like I have no confidence that he will make, what is the prudent strategic move to preserve that top 10 pick and focus on continuing to turn over this roster. This, like, just a pure sliver of a 10th seed, just like it puts fear in me that like this is heading nowhere fast. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be, let's try to like ride out Zach and Vooch and Lonzo to a full United Center to try to like actually compete. That's what I expect, honestly.
Yeah. And that's the trend we've seen. And I don't see that trend changing going forward either.
As like with Zach, he had like the partial separated shoulder, played through it, and he missed last night's game with an adductor strain. Mm-hmm. One of the keys to him where we couldn't find a trade for him was people were concerned about his availability. Is him already suffering 2 injuries this season, even though it only resulted in 1 missed game so far? Is that going to like kind of pull down his trade value, even though he's been like scoring like all-star Zach?
I think that there's this narrative that follows Zach throughout the NBA that he is, I don't know, soft or an injury-prone player. And I think it's a little bit harsh on him, to be fair. I do think that he's proven in the past that he tries to play through injury. He tries to remain available as much as he possibly can because he wants to play ball. And, we know he's an elite scorer. He's a flawed player, but he's an elite scorer. And he could be of benefit to many teams around the league. But as you saw in the offseason, his reputation just wasn't it. It wasn't enough to get a move done. I think he's trying to change that already. You can see that in the way he's been playing. And it could just be a case of really bad luck if he does pick up an injury that ends up stretching out longer and longer or requiring more intervention medically, that could damage it again going forward. And I think that's a massive risk that's always hanging over this team. Lonzo is the very same. And I think that if AK has his head screwed on right, which that's a big question mark, he'll look at that. And while the value is as high as it can possibly be during the course of this season, heading towards the trade window, he has to look to shop them. He has to look to move them. regardless of how it's looking on the floor and how well they are or aren't playing. He needs to try and move them.
Yeah. When it comes to trade value, the more like I see how the NBA works, trade value feels like it's one of those things where it's like us on the outside, we have perceptions of what trade value is, but then I feel like almost similar to like a stock market, right? There's always insider information, and there's like stuff that like people will never be privy to that sort of kind of behind the scenes sets a value. I have like my hypothesis is that there is a clear market for Zach LaVine. This is just my hypothesis. There's a market for him. I question like, is there enough engagement on the Bulls front office side with its peers to do their very best to capitalize in that market and make a deal happen? Because it's not unprecedented that a quote unquote flawed star or a star that's perceived to have issues is moved. It's not unprecedented for that star to be moved either right before the season starts or even at this point. We've seen the last few seasons with the Damian Lillard trade happen pretty late. Going into the beginning of a season, you had the Bradley Beal trade, Harden. There's a number of examples where it's happened. My open question is like, why is AK not been able to do that? And I don't think it's purely a Zach LaVine thing. You look also going back over the summer where like you had these leaks come out that frankly sabotaged the Bulls' endeavor. If they truly want to trade Zach LaVine, should be in leaks about how he's perceived within the organization that's trying to trade him. Like there's just so many miscues by this front office in terms of like trying to achieve what, at least on paper, they're saying that they want to do. They want to have a youth movement. They want to move on from Zach. It's been the worst kept secret in the NBA for like the last 2 or 3 seasons. It just needs to be like a simple focus and honestly just more clear decisions. They're not going to win a Zach LaVine trade probably. They're not going to get like 4 or 5 first round draft picks. They need to be willing to take wherever they want or whatever they can get for the specific reason that Neil just hit on. There is risk in like not making a decision is a decision, and there is risk that comes with that. And too many times over and over, Arturas Karnisovas has been willing to accept the risk of doing nothing and it's blown up in his face every single time. Like, he has to cut the cord at some point and learn from his mistakes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Neil.
No, go for it, Derek.
Okay, so do you guys think that the backlash that AK got from the Vooch trade and trading the picks, how Vooch has been playing up and down, is that weighing on him to try to win a Zach LaVine trade, which is kind of holding it up?
Possibly. I mean, at the end of the day, AK is also going to be focused on keeping his own job secure, right? And in order to do that, he needs to impress the dwarfs, and he's not going to do that by not getting anywhere and losing the faith of the fans, and we start seeing the stadium empty out again a little bit like it did before, which is what instituted change for us before. That's the only thing that makes change happen within this organization, and we all know it. So AK is going to be looking to look good himself, and in order to look good himself, he needs to make sure he not only makes the right decisions for the ball club, but he makes them at the right time. And I think, like you say, Morris, I think he just hasn't been doing that. He hasn't been making them at the right time. Now, when he first came in, we were all so impressed. He made so many changes and he made things happen. And it was like, okay, it took the first period to assess. And then the following off season and season, changes came from everywhere. But it's almost been like pumping the brakes since. And we need to institute a bit more change on this roster. And that comes, in my opinion, by moving Zach and Vooch and really going for a developmental restart.
Yeah. To the question you're asking, Derek, is I find myself asking questions more and more about like, there will never be leaks or probably reports about, the Bulls executives' job security or lack thereof I mean, even when, if we look back a few seasons ago, like the moving of Gar Pax, it pretty much, it seemed like the reports weren't really out there until it was like a 99% done deal. Like they're out. I would not be like this again, like hypothesis. I would not be surprised if there's at least some sort of, call them like reprimand sort of messages in AK's ear about, things need to happen differently, because there was such a, like, I go back to last season, compare AK's press conference at the trade deadline versus his end of season press conference. That's no more than a span of like 2 or 3 months. And I wrote about both of those press conferences. I know there's a real change in his tone when it came to that end of the season press conference, almost to the point of like, a child who had just been chastised for doing something stupid at school. Like it felt like somebody really got in AK's ear and like, hey, buddy, like cut the crap. It's time to do something different. Like that's just how, that's how his demeanor came across. And on one hand, hopefully he is getting that message, that's good. But the problem is, if AK is operating just purely from a place of fear of his job, I think that's how a Giddey trade happens the way it happens, where it's just like these very narrow, specific tunnel vision decisions purely for job preservation. And, some things that just like kind of just sell the present moment without any pointing towards a long-term coherent vision for the franchise.
Bulls for Life says, I think AK, as far as trades goes, just fucking sucks. His draft picks have been decently good outside of P. Will and Marko Simonovic, but it feels like he's trying to search for a Jokic-type gem.
Yeah, I used to think like, yeah, maybe that's what he was doing, but I think he gets, like, frankly, I think AK gets too much credit for Denver. And I'll say my reasoning for that is it wasn't AK by himself. It was Tim Connolly, who then moves on to Minnesota. Look at what the Timberwolves just did in probably about the same amount of time that AK's been on the job, right? Like, to me, it's pretty clear who really was the mastermind of the Denver ascension to a title contender. I don't think it's Arturas Karnisovas.
Yeah, we got the wrong guy. But speaking of what Neil says, AK bringing about job security. I mean, I don't know, because as Samity brings up, John Paxson is still on the payroll. Like,
yeah,
they didn't fire John Paxson. Paxson asked to step down, and they moved him to a special advisory role. So he's somewhere, lurking in the United Center corners and still getting paid. They did fire Gar, but I don't know. I don't really think that there's much job security to worry about with the Reinsdorf, because they're notoriously loyal to their employees.
Yeah, and that's played out in very disappointing, ugly ways on Jerry's White Sox side. Like, you've just seen probably the most embarrassing season of baseball ever played by the White Sox, and it's all sort of the same patterns of behavior where you have all these loyalists up top of the organization, sort of like empty rhetoric when you compare it to the actual on field or on court results of the team. That's also another layer of just like what, where I ask questions about like, what are the Bulls doing this season? I don't think you can discount that ever. I mean, that's probably a more difficult nut to crack, so to speak, of like figuring out like what does ownership need to do differently? Because I mean, they're notoriously like non-transparent about what they're doing. I mean, they don't really speak to press. They don't really talk about what they want to do or like compete, I wish I could ask either Michael or Jerry Reinsdorf, what is the plan for the Bulls? Because I feel like they owe it to the fans to some degree to start speaking more on that, because it's been 4 seasons of this new front office regime with, in terms of like, what has this regime accomplished? One single playoff win. And a gentleman's sweep. That's all AK has to show for at this point. And like, is that what the Reinsdorfs are cool with? Like, it's title banners hanging in their arena. Is that what they're striving for? Is that what they're comfortable with? Good chance there is. That's no problem to them because one of the things I wrote about also for OnTap Sports, if you do real digging and research on Jerry Reinsdorf, just as a side, like Jerry Reinsdorf made his fortune through real estate, and even in becoming a quote unquote sports owner, so much of the history of the White Sox and the Bulls has been just real estate transactions. Like the actual winning of either franchise has been like luck. Like Jerry Reinsdorf didn't draft Michael Jordan. Like that was the previous ownership group that did that. He just bought Michael Jordan basically.
Bulls for Life says we got the wrong guy. Story of the Bulls in its entirety. And as he brought up, like AK's draft picks have been solid outside of Marko Simonovic, and he mentions Patrick Williams. Like, what are you guys' opinions on Patrick as far as what we've seen from him so far this season, and what we've seen from his tenure as a Bull?
Minimal improvement this season, I think, is the fairest way to put it. I mean, Mo knows I've always been a Patrick Williams defender. I always liked him, but he's made it very, very difficult to continue to ride with him. He just has shown, like, we were talking about development, and that is one thing that Patrick Williams just hasn't done. He hasn't developed. If anything, when he first came into the league, he was being praised for being this really solid defender, able to take on any assignment. And now we're not even seeing that as much. I mean, he is a good defender. That hasn't gone away, but it's not as much of a talking point anymore as it was. And certainly in regards to his offense, his aggression, the way he approaches the game, it just hasn't gone anywhere. It's just stayed the same since his rookie year, more or less. And that's just not good enough for any player, let alone a number 4 pick.
Yeah. That was Patrick Williams was definitely a key storyline in the season preview I wrote for Bulls on Tap. Unfortunately, I like Pat as well, and like I've always been pro Pat, but this season it's kind of a crossroads, it is a crossroads for me at this point where it's like I can't really defend anymore. Like, seeing the turnovers constantly, just the anemic offense basically. I wrote in the season preview, like, there's some folks that might view that like this needs to be a prove-it year for Patrick just because he got that new contract. I don't think there's anything to prove anymore with him. He is who he is. He's a role player. He is going to be a person where, like, if you get double-digit scoring out of him, that's cool. But more often than not, it's going to be single digits and, like, kind of uninspired play, sadly. Even last night with the Jazz, like, I think, the thing I tweeted last night is, like, I would be very happy to never see Patrick Williams dribble NBA ball in NBA game ever. Like, I seriously think he should just purely be an off-ball player because look at who he's always been benched for. He's been benched for Torrey Craig and Javonte Green, guys who excelled at doing things with 0 dribbles. Like, to me, that's an example. Like, it's been clear as day for seasons now. Like, Pat, do what the guys who keep taking your job are doing. Like, that's right. Simple as that.
It's mad to hear you say that as well after him cooking Jason Tatum's ankles.
If the Bulls could just play Jason Tatum every single game, Pat would break his ankles twice. And
there you go. To answer Samity's question there, do I still like those rainbow threes? Yeah, I do. I love, it's been a running joke for years now on our pod that I love the sexy rainbow threes of Patrick Shot. You can tell I'm an island, can't you? So it's the arc in his shot. That's what I love. It's a very slow release, unfortunately, but the actual trajectory of his shot, I love it. I love the way it splashes.
Yeah. I would say one more thing about Patrick too. Like, I would love to see more of him in that whole small ball 5 role because I think that's the best opportunity for Patrick to sort of like minimize the liabilities he has offensively, and still be able to sort of like be a roaming defender where like he could potentially cause some chaos, because it's just like I don't I I used to buy into the idea like, oh, Pat, he's playing out of position, he should play the wing instead of playing like power forward, that'll help him. But it's just like you can't really make that argument anymore because his handle is bad and he's a turnover machine if he's dribbling on the ball. So like him as a small ball five, I think there are some interesting things in there where, one, from a development standpoint, opportunity for him to get on the block, become a better rebounder. I do like seeing him get, like, when he's trailing and he can just step into those threes as a trailer, that seems to be a better shot for him versus him trying to like think on the fly and find a dribble or find his shot. Like if he can do more of just like be the five, trail into your threes. I mean, he kind of becomes a stretch big that we never knew we had.
True.
Like I agree with you, Morris. Like, don't dribble Pat. Like, he should be strictly 3 and D. He can give Neil the rainbow threes that he likes, and guard. Like, every time he dribbles, he's like dribbling off his foot, and it's just just shoot, Pat. You're good at shooting. You're good at defense. I seen 2 good points in the comments. Bulls for Life said when AK drafted Pat, there was a hole at small forward because we had Wendell Carter and Lauri Markkanen at 4 and 5. He was just supposed to come and be defensive, and now we need more. And then Samity says if Pat was drafted lower in the draft, he feels like expectations would be different. It's no excuse at this point since Iowa was drafted in the 2nd round. He takes advantage of opportunities.
Yeah,
I kind of agree that if Pat wasn't drafted 4th, like expectations would be lower.
Absolutely.
I also kind of blame Stacy, like shout out Stacy, but nicknaming him the Paw and the whole Kawhi comparison, it kind of got Pat in some hot water because people are like, how do you compare him to Kawhi other than injuries?
Yeah,
that's a good. That point that Bulls for Life is bringing up. Here's a question I want to pose to both of you, because this is something that pops into my head. Like, knowing what we all know now about Pat and also Lauri post Bulls, would have been perhaps a more prudent move instead of trying to put Pat as a wing right out of the gate. Like, what if in fact AK would have did the opposite of play Lauri at the 3 with Pat as the 4 to truly focus on defense?
Yeah, that could have been an interesting move. But to be honest with you, I don't think Lauri was ever going to become the player that he has become in a Bulls jersey. It wasn't the right environment for him. He needed to move on. I mean, and it wasn't even like he left the Bulls and then he turned into that player either. I mean, he had to move from the Bulls to the Cavs and then over to the Jazz before he found himself and started to really develop into the player that we are used to seeing on the floor today. And I think a lot of Bulls fans tend to look at players like Lauri that move on and forget the fact that they had to go through a journey to get to where they are, to become the player that they are. And it's not necessarily mean it was going to happen in Chicago.
Yeah, I agree with Neil. Because at that point, Lauri could not play the 3. I think they tried him out at the 3 sometimes, and it just was horrible because you're coming off of Fred Hoiberg, who used Lauri pretty good. Then you got Jim Boylan, and he didn't use anybody good. So I don't think he would have developed the skills that he has now to where he's made an all-star team if he stayed with the Bulls. So I'm not sure. Like, I don't think that would have helped Lauri or Pat.
Yeah. Well, it definitely helped. I mean, when helped him going to Cleveland and playing behind or playing in front of Mobley and Jared Allen. So,
Mhm.
Yeah, because the Cavs were like, let's just take all the big people out there together.
Yep.
yeah. And it's funny, like people kind of scoffed at that, but like, kind of, it certainly like turned around their franchise going big when people were still thinking like small was the way to go.
Mhm.
And certainly helped Laurie, I think, just finally figure out like who he was as an NBA player.
Yeah.
Bulls were like, to be fair, Laurie probably would have been good if the Bulls didn't have Jim Boylan, who essentially ruined his game almost immediately.
That name should be redacted from life, Jim Boylan.
Yeah, he'll now be referred to as redacted. That's just bad memories.
Oh,
Yeah,
stop.
who should never be mentioned.
Yeah.
Captain Punch Clock is who I like to call him.
Captain who?
Captain Punch Clock.
Okay, yeah, okay, fair enough.
Oh no, but going with Pat, like, you know, he's in the starting lineup. I feel like he would be better on a bench role, but you know, who you plug in at his spot? Would it be Julian Phillips?
You can. Yeah, Julian Phillips has definitely shown improvement in his game this season. I like him. I like his athleticism. He certainly fits into the scheme of run and gun that they're trying to play. I've a lot of time. Like we're always praising J Pip, as we call him on our pod. And yeah, we're big fans of Julian Phillips. Big fans.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it last night in the game. That was the first sub, right? Phillips came in for Pat. So if it will be interesting to see if that trend continues and then sort of the minutes distribution as a result of that, because I think it was what it couldn't have been. It might have been like at the in between the 8-minute and 7-minute mark, like that sub happened. It just felt like pretty early in the game, honestly. But I wasn't surprised that it happened because Pat did not look good in that first quarter last night. Pat, yeah, and I think there's like two angles of like that question of like, you know, who if you were to bench Pat, who is the person that takes his role? It kind of comes back to that fork in the road of like, is this a development season or are you really trying to win? Because I think if it's development, it absolutely should be Julian Phillips. I suppose if you're trying to win, you've got Torrey Craig just sitting there, sort of like just keeping himself on ice or whatever. He's probably ready to go at this point in the season. So it just depends on like what is the true motivation of this roster? What's the true motivation of the leadership of the Chicago Bulls for the rest of this season?
That's the glaring question because you know we want to keep this pick, so the season should be development. It should be developing Julian Phillips and Modest Buzelis, Dalen Terry. Like these guys have shown improvement from where they were drafted to know that Dalen and Julian were raw. And no, Dalen definitely looks good on the defensive end. He fits the running gun pace. Julian also young running gun style. He hasn't really shot the three well this season like he did in the preseason. But if that comes along, I really don't see the need for so many Patrick minutes, especially as a starter. But like you said, are they really trying to win every game? Because you're below 500 again, so that's not really going well right now.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it will. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that that you're talking about being below 500 again. We've kind of missed the chance to get above 500 and be comfortable above 500 by dropping the last two games, which were very much winnable games. And we're kind of heading now into a little bit of a more difficult stretch coming up. So the chances of getting back up above 500 now, it's looking pretty slim.
Yeah, it's looking slim. And the thing that gets me is like, if the goal is truly to win, then I would like to see a roster put on the floor that is truly set up to win. This roster is not set up to do that. So it's like it's the worst of both worlds, where it's like you're trying to win, but you don't win the games. And then also you're not developing your future. So it's like, again, what is the point of this? Either like we're truly going to try to win games, or we're going to like try to set up a roster that will eventually win games. But it's like we're not doing either particularly well at this point.
Right.
Bulls for Life says, I want to pick your brain about this. The Bulls lack true size at the 4 and really at the 5 outside of Vooch. Does it seem like AK's just kicking the can in terms of drafting bigs for unknown reason? What is AK waiting for?
Well, we talked about the offseason, what area we would like to see addressed. And what I came up with was my biggest fear was the 5 position. That was the biggest concern for me, because at the time we weren't sure what was happening with Drummond. And you know, okay, we've plugged the gap now with Jalen Smith, and who I really like, by the way. And it's just so thin on the ground. If we take an injury to one of those 2 players, we're in big trouble. You know, big trouble, especially if one of those players happens to be Vooch, who's playing out of his mind this season. Because what are you left with? You're left with either going small ball 5, or you've got Sanogo to come up and try and play in that position. And it really damages the shape and the strength of this squad going forward if any damage is done to any player at the 5 right now. And I did think it was the area that needed to be addressed, and felt that, okay, Jalen Smith, yeah, like I said, I really, really like him, but he's not really fulfilling that area of need enough. They certainly needed another backup, in my opinion, that could maybe a swing player between the 4 and the 5. And they just don't have anyone of a high enough level to do that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I like Jalen Smith as well. I frankly view him a bit more on the 4 side versus the 5, because you're not really going to get any rim protection from Jalen Smith. He's definitely a stretch big, and I think that there's a benefit to that. But it's hard to live that way with Jalen Smith when there isn't sort of like a change of pace or different sort of gear with your 5 you can go to. I think that was one of the benefits of having that tandem of both Vooch and Drummond in the previous seasons, where it's like they're different centers and they do different things. And I think that was useful because, you know, those times where Vooch just didn't have it, whether it be like he's getting picked apart in defense or for some reason the offense just wasn't there, you at least had Drummond, who, you know, has his flaws, but was a bit more efficient in terms of like, you knew you're going to get the rebounds out of him. You knew he could go clean up around the glass. Now we just don't have any of that. And the other thing about Drummond, too, I always thought was sort of underappreciated. He actually was a very sneaky defender on the perimeter, and he still is, I think. Like you see it somewhat even with the Sixers games, where, you know, he can get out there, force deflections, he can get steals. There's some things about Drummond that, like, I thought were actually pretty complimentary to Vooch, and we just don't have that this season.
Yeah,
right. Like, yes, I like Jalen Smith. I thought maybe last night Billy could have tried playing Jalen and Vooch together. Like, say you see Jalen a bit more as a stretch 4. Thought that might have helped out, especially with some of the rebounding issues. But like Neil, like you said, like when that game where Jalen went out and they had to call up Sanogo to be the backup center, and people were immediately like, I do not need to see Sanogo anymore this season. So you're stuck with that, or you got Pat playing the small ball 5. Like, to answer Bulls like question, I think that AK is so focused on this positionless basketball to where he's drafting 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" guys with long wingspans that he feels that can play 3, 4, 5 if needed, and focusing on the small ball to where we're very small, and especially if there's an injury to our center, like I don't know why they have this focus on small ball when Billy really hasn't had that much success with it here.
And I would add to that, the league has really moved away from that. Also, like if this like small ball was something that the league was still like deep into and really like that was at the forefront of like how teams were competing like 5-6 seasons ago. The league really like I would argue honestly, the league stopped being a small ball team with the 22 NBA finals. I mean, the Boston Celtics probably should have 2 titles at this point, in my opinion. But it's just like they kind of shot themselves out of that 22 series or 22 finals against the Warriors, to where I thought they had the more superior roster and they had the size advantage. You just Steph Curry still Steph Curry, so they didn't squeeze out. But I mean, the league's been a bit like it's gone back to bigs for the last 4 or 5 seasons, and I don't understand why AK doesn't get that. Like the small ball stuff is. If you don't have elite 3-point shooting, small ball's not your thing that you should be pursuing.
Yeah, but it's changed, like you say. But the center position has changed too. It has gone back more to a big guy league, and you can see it creeping in more and more. But the big guys aren't like they used to be. Before they were these methodical, slow-paced, get in the paint type players. Now they're running like the athletes that are down in the 1, 2, 3 position. They are athletic. They are 3-point shooting bigs. They can space the floor, and that's what you were used to seeing from your wings and your guards. And now you're seeing it at the center position across more and more teams in the NBA now.
Yeah, even the quote unquote traditional bigs now are much more athletic than what centers used to be 20, 30 years ago. To your point, Neil, they aren't just these big lumbering oafs who are just like, putting their hand up in the block, waiting for the ball to come to them. Like, no, like the bigs are mobile now, even if they are non-shooting bigs. Like, both of I have my biases from college, and like, so Zach Edey, like, I think that's the future of what bigs are. If you're going to be a traditional big, Zach Edey is really setting the precedent for like what the new traditional big is going to be, where it's like you are big, you have a post presence, but at the same time, you do need to be able to be mobile enough to defend at the perimeter or at the block, be able to run the break, be able to keep up with a Ja Morant. Like the rules of the game are changing for bigs for sure, like almost like on a nightly basis. So AK needs AK would do well to pay attention more and more to what his peers are doing with centers, because he seems to not be keeping up with the pace.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like Wolves for Life says, it seems like the league is gearing towards these tall, lanky, Stretch Armstrong players like Mobley, Wembley, Chet, and Sarr. These guys are coming in nearly every season, and they're the ones with success. And I think that's what you guys are just both saying. Like, the bigs have changed to these super athletic, tall guys that aren't just the typical lumbering players that are down in the center. And AK is like he's behind the times.
Yeah, and it's not, and like this is why I'm critical of him, because it's not for lack of opportunities with him either. Like, these are explicit choices he's making. You look at Trace Jackson Davis with the Warriors, right? Like, he was a bottom of the second round draft pick, like just freely available there. But because of AK's history with how he values or potentially devalues draft picks, like, he's not making use of the assets in a way where he can go hit on a margin player like that and bring some size to this roster without breaking the bank. Like, giving Vooch $20 million a year versus like, opportunity to have actually turned over the roster and restocked it with this 2024 draft. Like, I think that's a huge missed opportunity by this franchise. And some people will say like, oh, I'd rather have Josh Giddey because he's a known all-star with the upside and stuff. That's all theoretical just as much as a draft pick. And for me, if I have to choose between theoreticals, I would rather have the theoretical where I feel like I can get the most upside value and contribution to my team that like I can build around because to Josh Giddey's credit, like he is demonstrating some upside already, and I'm not going to deny that. However, in a team full of guards, right? Like how much more guard upside do you need versus center upside? Like something, yeah, when Vooch goes down, who's stepping up next? And like there's no answer to that right now. I just think that's borderline like front office like I won't say malpractice, but I'll say it's a reckless decision where you have a roster, you had a draft class full of like serviceable depth that you could have took advantage of at a very affordable cost point, given that also like your boss says you can't go with the luxury tax. Like these are all the decisions in the interplay of like I just don't see him navigating these trade-offs effectively.
It's like,
yeah, it's a big fear, isn't it?
Like, let's say, we keep our pick and say we end up with the number 1 pick and we draft Cooper Flagg, who's what, a 3, 4 along?
It's probably, I think he's trending as like a 4 because of what I have to look at his stats. Like, I believe he's like 6'10", like he projects wingish given his skill set and his size.
Right, and we just drafted Modest, who's like, given how small he is, he's a bit more of a 3 than he's a 4 right now.
I would rather see him be 3, honestly.
We still have a problem at center because, what, are we going to keep Vooch again?
Yeah, and it was a good draft for centers. I mean, you had Kel'el Ware, you obviously had Edey, you had Donovan Clingan. I mean, Filipowski going all the way to the second round was a shock by most accounts, right? So, like, there was ample opportunity if AK were willing to be more shrewd about his assets. Just saying, here, have Alex Caruso. I don't need any picks back. I'm good. Like, that's to me, it's going to be a decision that maybe I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but I feel like that's up there with the Jimmy trade in terms of like just very catastrophic, short-sighted asset management that is not setting up this franchise for like future success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if AK was willing to buy a second-round pick or trade something like Torrey Craig, Javon Carter for a second-round pick, maybe you get Filipowski as well, and he looked good. Yeah. So then you have Modest and Filipowski, and you're kind of set up better for the future instead of just taking your pick and going home.
Yeah.
Sammy says play Coop at the 5.
Cooper Flagg's actually listed as 6'9".
Don't put it past Billy.
There you go. So going on what you were saying there, right? Let's just say we keep our pick and it ends up somewhere in a decent number, 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Do you trust AK enough to draft properly? Let's say he doesn't get the 1, right? And Cooper Flagg goes at the 1. Ace Bailey goes at the 2. So let's say they got the 3 or the 4 or the 5 pick. Do you trust AK to make the correct decision at that point or not?
I don't trust him. I genuinely do not trust him because if you go on history, when AK had number 4 pick, he picked Patrick Williams. And I mean, at this point, I think there's enough history, unfortunately, where it's like that probably is not going to go down in history as like the optimum pick that AK could have made given his choices available to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't trust him either. Like we're saying, you pick Patrick Williams number 4, and he was coming off the bench in college, and like he's showing you what he did in college, still in the pros, to where he's a bench piece, and you drafted him 4th. You drafted Ayo in the 2nd round. I mean, that turned out good, but then you drafted Marko Simonovic, Dalen Terry, who was raw, who you had, playing in the G League for first 2 seasons?
2 seasons, yeah.
The Julian as well, who was raw and really was playing more so in the G League, and Sonogo, who you got on this 2-way contract, and he's pretty much been stuck in the G League his whole time here. It's nothing that he's done since he's been in the position that he's been with the Bulls that shows that he deserves trust with drafting the right player for his team.
He likes projects.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even Modest. Because he's not getting any time because, he's still raw and has things to work out. And that's been what AK's been doing. He's drafting. It's like he's trying to find a diamond in the rough where he can say, hey, look, I drafted this guy. He was raw. I saw the potential, and now look at him. And it just has not worked out at this point.
It's like AK. It's like AK has graduated from high school and he's passed. He knows how to do high school math, and like he won't let go of having to do math by hand when once you become an adult. Who does math the way you did in school, right? Like we all have phones and spreadsheets. Like we have ways to do like rudimentary stuff simple. But it's like instead of doing that rudimentary stuff simple, AK, like that's what he's doing. He's like, I want to make this as difficult as possible to get a star NBA player. Where it's like none of us sitting here are like NBA GMs, but I feel like even we're at the point where it's like, dude, do the obvious thing, like just get a functioning NBA player that like can play ball now, and we're not going to wait 4 seasons just to see this player shoot like 35% from 3.
Yeah. Bulls for Life said he picked Pete Will over Halliburton, who was gearing up to go to Chicago. He was told he'd likely be picked, and they went and got Patrick Williams. He also says at this point, screw the number 1 pick. Even a top 10 pick would be worth in this class. There's going to be servable players regardless. Favorites outside of Bailey and Flagg is Mullins. Is that how you say it?
I have to look up. I'm not familiar with Mullins, but I know like so, and like I'm being intentional about like making these retweets when I see them because everybody thinks it's just about Cooper Flagg, but yeah, this is a deep draft class, much deeper than the previous season where the top names or the top prospects besides Flagg. I mean, it's Ace Bailey, as you mentioned, both Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, son of Bulls legend Ron Harper, right? They're both at Rutgers, so. I live in New York. I am weighing like, should I go to a Rutgers game to see these guys? And then VJ Edgecombe at Baylor, that's another one. I just saw a highlight from him today where he just like posterized some kid. I think this is this 2025 draft is going to be the one where it has that perception of like being the next generational talent source.
All right. Samity, brings up AK's lack of getting draft picks, where he says it's easy to find diamonds if you have more draft picks. And, no, that's true. And I know we could probably go on for a couple more hours of talking about how incompetent AK has been. So let's turn to the Bulls back-to-back that's coming up tomorrow and Thursday. We fly down to Texas and play the Dallas Mavericks, and then come back home to Chicago and play the Minnesota Timberwolves. How you guys feeling about those 2 games?
Not good. Not good at all. These are 2 teams that have the potential to absolutely wipe the floor with this Bulls team. They will pick apart the holes that are glaringly obviously there, and could be 2 very, very embarrassing losses, I think.
I would have to agree with Neil. I mean, to have the entire Western Conference Finals matchup in a back-to-back this early in the season, I mean, that's diabolical, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, it just man, somebody does not like the Bulls as far as like who's making the schedules.
And
But
isn't the second one a home game too? So they have to travel in between too,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, it's an away and a home back to back.
That's just gross.
yeah, it's going to be it's not going to be light work for the Bulls at all. But it will be interesting. I mean, what the Bulls they at least saw some flavor of what the Timberwolves were, obviously in preseason game. But I mean, regular season is a different sort of animal. I would be shocked if the Bulls stole either one of those games, to be honest. Just given the talent that they have. I mean, the Bulls are gonna, if Keontae George is lighting this up from three, I can only imagine what Klay Thompson is going to do because we know how Klay feels about shooting against the Bulls.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like if the Bulls are going to steal one, it's probably going to be Minnesota if somehow they catch Randall like dribbling too much. It's just
The only thing is, I think that Anthony Edwards is going to be out for blood because having been beaten in the preseason, I don't think he's going to wear that very well. So they could very much be looking for a revenge game.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it would not surprise me if we stole one of these games because it's just how the Bulls operate. Like, you lose to the teams that you think like we should have wins against, and then somehow we get this one win over a good team, and then it's back to like a losing streak.
Yeah, I feel like it would be something fluky happens. Like I said, either like the Bulls catch Randall in his hero ball mode, or somehow maybe like they get into Luka's head early, and you know how he gets when he's on his fit with the refs. Like, I just feel like it'll be something wonky or weird that will lead to a Bulls win. It's not going to be like just pure dominance.
No.
Okay, Neil, we thank you for joining us. We're going to let you get out of here. Before you go, tell the people where they can follow you, your podcast, where they can subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll get us across all the streaming platforms. We're on YouTube as well. On Twitter, you'll find me floating around the place at Neil Seared UK, and you'll find everything from us at Seared UK.
Morris, thank you.
We also have a Discord as well, so come and join us in the Discord. We do the live thread on the Discord for all of the games. And going back on what you were saying earlier on, actually, I meant to throw this in earlier. We've started creating our own little emojis, as you can do on Discord, and one of them ones that we have is a little four butterfingers that we tend to put up for Patrick Williams. That dude needs to change his hand cream or something. I don't know.
Oh man, Morris, thank you for filling in for Melissa.
Of course.
Plug your latest writing for Bulls on Tap and where they can follow you at.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll plug it again. I mentioned it earlier, but my latest Bulls on Tap column I wrote about again, like everybody I feel like is captivated, understandably, with what the Bulls have been doing with the 3-point shooting and trying to be this breakneck fast break team. But there are some wrinkles that the Bulls are still working into their offense in the half court. So the column out there I have, what did I title it? FYI, the Bulls still care about half court offense. Definitely go out and read that at Bulls on Tap. Read all of our fine writing at Bulls on Tap, part of the On Tap Sports Net. And we will continue to just crank out content, whether it be the podcast or the writing, or also some spaces as well. Just want to keep serving Bulls fans.
All right, and thank you to everybody watching that's tapped in. About 184 people watching live on Election Day. So hope you guys all voted.
Yeah. Everybody on YouTube, please like and subscribe. That's always cool too. Cool and tough.
Yep. Like, subscribe. Make sure you know when the next episode will be. We'll probably be back on Thursday of next week. And Melissa should be back as well. And until next time, go Bulls.
Go Bulls. See red.